Okay, so welcome to another episode of the Women Petprenuers Podcast with your host, Mary O'Quenda. So we're going to do a little fun stuff for the next series, and I'm calling it the other side of grooming. So this is everything we kind of do that has nothing to do with grooming, because you know what? We're human. We have lives. We have lives outside of grooming. So my guest today is Jennifer Jenkins Bishop. Did I get the order right?
No, it's Bishop Jenkins, but it doesn't matter. At this point, now that my parents have passed, I'm just Jennifer Jenkins at this point. Although groomers do know me from the, when I lived in Illinois and I was active on the issues that are not grooming related, the name Bishop mattered because it was this big murder case in my family. So.
Okay, so thank you for making that a little bit easier. Jennifer Jenkins, everybody. All right, so, and that's what I wanted to talk to you about. You are very active in victim rights.
Right. And so you want me to just start with a very sad story?
Yes.
So 33 years ago in 1990, April 7th, 1990, my younger sister, I'm the oldest of three girls, and my youngest sister, Nancy, and her husband, Richard, and their unborn child were murdered. And she was only 25 years old. They had just been married like 3 years. I just sung at her wedding and we were still, having excitement about, moving into their own place. And, we lived just blocks from each other. And, we were then we're, all of a sudden we're pregnant and we're going to, start shopping for their baby. And, she was just a daily part of my life. And she was 7 years younger than I am, but just Nancy Bishop Langard was just one of the most amazing, vivacious, friendly, positive, joyous, and talented. Oh my gosh, was she talented. She was cast in her senior year at New Trier High School, which is New Trier High School in the Winnetka, Illinois, is actually a high school that has produced, Charlton Heston and Anne Margaret and a bunch of actors on TV shows that you would know, even like from the Friends cast and all of this stuff, like amazing, famous, lots and lots of famous people. It's apparently like one of the leading high schools in the country for producing gigantic name superstars. And she was a very talented actress. My mother was a very talented actress and singer, had majored in theater and had starred in many roles on stage. And Nancy had all that talent. We're all musical. We all sing. I played Golden Fiddler on the Roof in my senior year in high school. So, I got the bug a little bit too. But for the most part, Nancy was the one with all the talent. And she had played Maria in West Side Story her senior year. She was already doing professional acting in downtown Chicago. But then they got pregnant and they were just so excited. And actually the year that she was killed in 1990 was such an exciting year for them. They were going to move into their own house. They had just bought their first house because they had this baby on the way. They both had these really good executive jobs. They were just great people, she and Richard. And they were in their townhouse on a Saturday night, just relaxing, getting ready for bed. And an intruder broke into their house and marched them down to the basement and murdered them. And actually, we found out, I'll fast forward like 6 months, but we went 6 months without knowing this. The Winnetka murders made national headlines, very mysterious, who was this person? There was very little physical evidence at the scene of who it was that did it and why. Nobody could think of any reason why anybody would want to kill Nancy and Richard. They were the neatest people. And so it was a huge mystery. And for that 6 months, that's probably what did more to shape me into this sort of activist just because we were dealing with the press every day and didn't know who it was or why. And we were on, national, mystery, solve the murder mystery TV shows. And it was a nightmare. And so when we finally did find out, because of the local high school, New Trier High School, where Nancy had attended as a student, a young Vietnamese immigrant who had only been at the school a couple of months, or just that year, had heard a classmate express a great deal of interest in the murders, talk about it all the time, and finally told him that he had been the one that had done it, and he did it because he just wanted to see what it would feel like to shoot somebody, and he picked them at random. Their townhouse was across the street from the Winnetka police station, Winnetka, Illinois, and it was so that the back door that he broke into was kind of an eye shot, and so it was all like what I could do under the eyes of the police and get away with it. And he only lived like 2 blocks away, in a multi-million-dollar house, and his parents were friends of my parents, and he was just this 16-year-old who was, it turns out, as we finally found out that indeed it was him, had locked in his bedroom, and his parents let him have a padlocked bedroom, and that's a whole other conversation about the role of the parents. But he was clearly a serial killer in the making. He had tried to shoot with BB guns out on the street in front of their house in a very high-end suburb of the Chicago North Shore. He would go out to the bus stop where there was little second graders waiting for the bus, and he'd take a BB gun, point and blank at their head. When he was 13 years old, he just started walking up to kids, putting BB guns up against their heads and pulling the trigger and sending them to the doctor. And his parents were alarmed, of course, but they actually had to pay off some families that sued, were going to sue them and stuff. He had shown symptom after symptom that he was a very troubled young man who was hell-bent, probably, a sociopath. And he was later diagnosed to be a sociopath without conscience. The only difference between a sociopath and a psychopath is psychopaths have less touch with reality. Sociopaths have perfect touch with reality, but they have no conscience, and they delight in thrilling evil and inflicting harm. They actually get off on it. And so, and it's a very serious mental health diagnosis. It's probably the only group of people that deserve to stay in prison for life, or to be completely kept separate from us, because there's no cure for this. Psychiatrists have been studying this for years. And his parents were perfectly lovely people, but they were also really weak, and they just didn't see the danger. And he even tried to kill them. And that's when he actually poisoned the whole family's milk with stuff he brought home from high school chemistry class. And, after he set a girl on fire at school, set her sweater on fire. So after all of these incidences of him showing clear sociopathic tendencies, the family finally put him in a psych unit. He was diagnosed as dangerously sociopathic. They told him to keep him locked up. And the parents, once again, just being very weak, let him talk them into letting him come home and, okay, school's starting, and, I promise I'll be good. And, but they let him have a padlock on his bedroom door. And behind that padlock was writings about, how he worshiped Charles Manson, and how obsessed he was with guns. And he finally and the parents even knew he was trying to get a gun because he was trying to get fake paperwork. And that's a whole nother story. It's a long story, but there was a lot of evidence, and it was very troubling that the parents just ignored all that. And so he was able to finally get a gun. And he, as soon as he got it, within days, he just picked his target at random, which was the first of these condos across from the police station. And, he just went to the one on the end, and there was a glass door in the back, and he used a glass cutter, and, dressed himself all in black like an assassin, black leather gloves and a black trench coat and all that. And he waited for them to come home. He was actually sort of casing the joint when they walked in the door from celebrating on a Saturday night my father's 60th birthday. And he marched them down to the basement, and he shot Richard point blank in the back of the head with a .357 Magnum. And then he turned the gun on my 25-year-old pregnant sister, who literally crossed her arms over her pregnant belly and said, "Please don't kill me. Please don't kill my baby." And the killer actually aimed for the baby, fired directly into the abdomen, and aimed for that baby she was trying to protect. And then he shot her a second time in the chest. We actually found out in the autopsy, we knew the names of the baby that she had picked out. We wanted the autopsy to try to determine the gender of the child. And, when they went in, the bullet actually had hit the fetus directly and exploded it. It was unrecognizable. This was 1990, before DNA. So we were only able to bury the baby as baby Langert. And they were dead, and 25 and 29 years old. And then to not know for how long, who did it and why, and to finally find out that it was a local teenager whose parents were friends of my parents. It's been a long journey. And there was a whole series of things that turned me into an activist. But we had to get used to, right off the bat, talking to the news media, talking to elected officials, talking to the governmental officials, talking to prosecutors. We had all decided as a family that we would be together in solidarity of, speaking only of Nancy and Richard, not using the killer's name, not giving him any more publicity than he already had. And this was something that later my last surviving sister has chosen to abandon. My father had said, because he wanted attention, that was the one thing we wanted to never give him. So we always tried to make everything that we did about Nancy and Richard. And what made me interested specifically, there's a couple of issues that came out of this in terms of the next 30 years of my life, up to and including as we speak. I am extremely active. I still work part-time for an organization called Marsy's Law, which focuses on the rights of crime victims in the criminal justice system. And I actually am the director of Marsy's Law for Illinois, and we were the second state in the nation to actually pass a constitutional amendment giving an enforceable right to crime victims. Now, crime victims had after World War II and the UN Declaration of Universal Human Rights, and just progress that was being made in the criminal justice system through the civil rights movement and the women's rights movement of the 60s and the 70s. There was new laws around the country that were beginning to protect the right of a victim to be present in the courtroom anytime the offender was, or to be notified of any proceedings, to be heard in the sentencing procedures, to be able to consult with the prosecutor, to ask for, like some sort of a financial penalty if of the person who did the crime. So there's a number of victims' rights that are sort of classically understood, but every single state in the nation through the 60s, 70s, 80s had made victims' rights pretty much like a voluntary compliance thing, like, oh, this is nice new right we're going to give to people, but we're not going to really give it any muscle, any legal teeth. And so the Marsy's Law movement began in California with the man who is a lot responsible for our ability to do this, right? The man that invented the microchip for Broadcom communications. He was a engineer, he was into technology engineering and working on his PhD at UC Irvine in California, and working with his professor, they invented the chip that allows internet to be sent through the air. Like, wow. Yeah, so he is Dr. Henry Nicholas. He has been traditionally one of the richest men in the world. He's a multi-billionaire. But he had a little sister named Marcy, who was murdered by an abusive boyfriend that she had broken up with. And he said he was going to devote himself, and he has to this day. Marcy's Law is marcyslaw.us is the website if you want to know more about it. MARSYS, Marcy spelled with an S and not a C. marcyslaw.us has been this amazing program. We have now passed Marcy's Law in constitutional amendments. And so basically what it does is it gives teeth to victims' rights, because what happened in his case is after his little sister was murdered, and they were literally, he and his mother, they were at the grave burying her the day of the funeral. They were, they had just left the actual interment into the grave of his little sister, who was this beautiful little 23-year-old grad student at UC Santa Monica. And she was just been laid to rest, and they were on their way back home to meet with family at home after her murder and her funeral. And they stopped in the grocery store to pick up some food because they had people coming over. And in the grocery store was the killer, already released from prison without any notice to the victim's family that he was out on bond. And they're calling the police going, how does that happen? How does this guy get out on bond without us knowing about it? And they said, well, we are under no obligation under California law to notify the victim's family of the release of the accused on bail. And that's when Dr. Henry Nicholas, with all of his resources, said, well, we're going to fix that. And so that's where Marcy's Law began. He passed it into the California Constitution in 2008, and then turned his efforts to other states. I was already working with a coalition of sexual assault and domestic violence people. I had a website called IllinoisVictims.org that was all about the rights of murder victims, and we were partnering together with other kinds of victims, domestic violence, sexual assault. We were working already with the Illinois Attorney General to try to make Illinois' Constitution stronger. And then Dr. Nicholas, I was actually at a conference, and here's another reason why this is sort of an interesting story, but my husband, Bill Jenkins, and I met because he is a murder victim's family member. We were both speakers at a conference at Boston College in 2001. It was called Healing the Wounds of Murder, and he and I were on a panel together, and the rest is history. But it's been an amazing journey, and he's a very prominent victim activist. He authored a book. He's a college professor. And when his son was murdered in Richmond, Virginia, in 1997, he authored a book called What to Do When the Police Leave: A Guide to the First Days of Traumatic Loss, which has sold over 40,000 copies and is being used by police and social workers all across the country, crisis response teams. When somebody has gotten some bad news, they give out my husband's book. His book is widely distributed. And so we were both very, very aware of that branch of the social services and law enforcement community that works in victim services of different kinds. And we attended together a National Organization of Victim Assistance Conference, which my husband's actually going to one this year, next week. And the NOVA conference is where I heard about Dr. Nicholas and what they had just done in California. And they announced there that they're looking for other states to go to. And I went running across the ballroom to tell them that we were already working on this in Illinois. And so we got to partner with them. And I became the director of Marcy's Law for Illinois. I retired from teaching. I was teaching high school. I stopped teaching and I went full-time onto this and worked for several years. I'm a licensed professional lobbyist. I was selected by the Illinois Women's Institute of Leadership as a candidate to get political training. So I learned how to lobby. I actually ran for office. I worked in the state capitol lobbying votes. We worked about 6 years to get this passed. It's not easy to pass a constitutional amendment. So we did that. And I had also done work with the Brady Campaign to Prevent Gun Violence as their national coordinator for victims and survivors. So I've been to places like Virginia Tech, where after the mass shooting in Virginia Tech, I was there on site. doing, support and information and resources for crime victims. So it has been a way of healing, a way of helping others, a way of trying to make a difference in the wake of an unbelievably nonsensical tragedy. And I'm still having to deal with it because there is now an effort to free my sister's killer, who was sentenced to 3 life without parole sentences. But because he's a juvenile, he's getting an extraordinary amount of lobbying money and attention. And so we're working very hard now. And it's not that I don't support criminal justice reform. I'm against the death penalty. I worked against the death penalty in Illinois because I'm against killing. But I have been very active on, criminal justice issues. And one of the things I really stand my ground on is when people are a diagnosed sociopath or psychopath, they need to permanently be kept away from polite society because they will never, there's no therapy, there's no medication that will fix them. They're broken in a way that is going to always be dangerous, even when they're in their 80s. There was a 79-year-old man that was released in Illinois that was a murderer. He had raped and murdered a series of young teenage girls. And when he was released at the age of 79, they figured he was safe. Within a month, he went out and did it again. So you just have to be careful with some offenders. And so that's one of the issues that I'm still working on. But yeah, that's it in a nutshell. That's been a bigger part of my life than grooming. Grooming has been a lovely thing that I have enjoyed, and I have found dogs to be my happy place and my therapy and my escape and my, that beautiful, innocent world where things are good and hearts are true. The rest of it has been painful but rewarding and an amazing journey.
Wow. So I've heard the story before, but not as much detail as you went into today. I find it amazing that it's only been pretty recent that a lot of the victims' rights are there.
Yeah.
I cannot imagine walking into a supermarket and there's the person who killed your child or your sibling just standing there and not having some sort of heads up.
And Dr. Nicholas's more elderly mother was with him in that grocery store, and she was so scared she had a heart attack. She survived, but that's how traumatized she was running into this man.
Wow. Yeah. And the response, well, we don't have to tell you. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it's nice to see some changes, and I'm going to say thank you. Thank you for being on the forefront of that.
It's really important that everybody know, because anybody could become a crime victim at any time. And it is really important for us to know what's going on. I mean, in many cases, it's domestic violence where there is let me just tell you like one other quick story. There's a system called VINE, Victim Information Notification Every Day, something like that. But it's put on by a company out of Louisville, Kentucky, who the man, he's had computer skills. He had a daughter who was a domestic violence victim in her marriage, and they got her away from him and they got him locked up. And then he was released on bond without notice to the family. And he went home, within an hour of getting out, he went out and killed her. And so the father became the forefront of this technology that is now this VINE system, or this, it's called SAVIN, or with state automated victim information. But it is a system that is now in all 50 states. It is automated. Every crime victim, if it's a violent crime, and there are different laws in different states, what defines you as a crime victim, if it's a misdemeanor traffic offense, probably is not going to apply. But if it's hurt you in some way personally, it's rape, it's domestic violence, it's sexual assault, it's murder, it's anything else that is a threat to personal safety, you're going to qualify to be automatically notified of anything that has to do with the offender. And that is something that you can register for, and you can go to VineLink on the websites, and you can actually find out, and it'll usually be told to you through the prosecutor's offices in your county where the crimes occurred. But quite often it's, it's just something you can go and find yourself. And you can actually track the movements of offenders through this. You can, in fact, newspaper reporters use the same system. They take advantage of the existence of it because they can track the movement or transfer of a prisoner from place to place, or the release of somebody. So a lot of people, including prisoners' family members, are using the system too. So it's an automated system, and it's universal across the country now because of a father who lost a daughter and was motivated to try to do something to make sure that the public had information that they need to keep safe.
Technology is amazing, right? So when I first was mobile grooming, I'm sure the internet was there. Don't ask anyone if they actively used it. Okay.
Right.
But as a mobile groomer, household groomers, we go to people's houses. Right?
Oh, yeah.
And what's nice now, and was not readily available when I first started, is that you can Google sex offender / your county and state, and you could pull up registered sexual offenders.
Correct. And there's, in many states, a murder registry as well. If somebody is a convicted murderer, but they're out, they've served their time, or they've been given a probationary release, an early release or something like that, they will go in, like Illinois, thanks to people like me, has a murder registry as well, where the public can know, is the guy living next door to me a convicted murderer or not?
That's interesting to know, because when I get off this podcast,
I'm going to find out.
I'm going to find out.
Yeah.
But we have tools at our disposal that we didn't have 5, 10, 15 years ago.
Right.
So utilize them, people.
Yes, and Dr. Henry Nicholas of Marsy's Law is a lot of the technology that we have related to the internet and Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, that kind of cell phone technology. He's a lot responsible for that kind of stuff.
Okay, cool.
Amazing. Yeah.
All right. All right. So
I just wanted to say, you, my dear, thank you, Mary, for becoming the tech guru in the grooming industry that has empowered so many groomers to be able to do so many more things. You have been the pioneer in our field in that. We are deeply grateful. And in your dad, it's true.
All right. I love my phone. Absolutely adore my phone. I cannot imagine life without my phone. But anyway, because there's things with it that, there's locators. Now, granted, if I'm in an accident, they'll be able to find my phone. But you know what? Might give a heads up to in and around where I am. But I see some of the new technology that comes out, and every time I turn around, there's like something new, right? Things like the tile and the air tags,
Mm-hmm.
all right, which can easily be sewn into a piece of clothing or jacket, or when I travel with them, I'll have my air tags in my bags, and so it'll tell me where my luggage is, which is really nice. But there's so much.
And don't people use them on their dog collars and stuff?
There's one for pets. I mean, the downside to them is you have to have some sort of Wi-Fi ish to know where they're at.
Right.
So there's a signal for it. But yeah, there's a version for the pets that I believe it's Apple. Don't quote me on this. That is a specific collar or something that you add to a collar that has like a tracking device on it. But there was something a couple of years ago, and I know the company is still around, but it's a bracelet. The company was called Flare, Flare, and they made bracelets that look like bracelets. All right. But if you tap the face on it, it would send out an emergency alert.
Ah. Yes, very cool. So you could call for help and people wouldn't know.
Yeah,
Excellent. Yeah.
so there's stuff out there, and technology is improving by leaps and bounds. So you'd be amazed at what is there. I mean, yeah, I got bracelets for myself and my daughters. They were not cheap, but
It's a great tool.
it's
You
a
know,
tool.
my husband and I just moved to Virginia to retire, but this is back here close to his family. His son was murdered here in Richmond area, which is where we have now retired to. Or well, semi-retired. We're not really retired yet. But the first time that he was out on our 10 wooded acres here, he's having a great time mowing our yard, he had his cell phone in his pocket while he was mowing on this tractor mower through our, kind of wooded acreage here. And all of a sudden, 3 911 call sheriffs pulling up in our driveway. We've only lived here like a week. And police cars zooming in with lights of flaring saying, "What's the emergency, folks?" And I'm like, "What emergency?" Somebody called 911 from here. I'm like, "Really?" No, I was in the house cleaning. So we went out to where my husband was mowing the yard and found out that the phones, if you shake them,
Yes.
they will call 911 by themselves.
Yeah,
I never knew that.
I think some of the newer phones do that. Yes, it's crazy.
Yeah, so my husband's phone called 911 and all he had to have done was locked it or turned it off, but apparently writing on the tractor mower. Yeah, so I didn't even know that they did that. So
Yeah, my husband has, I make him carry his phone with him when he's mowing the lawn too. But he has this little bag around his neck and he sticks the phone in the bag. So it's not like on his body vibrating.
Oh, that's smart. All right, I'm going to tell my husband that.
Yeah, it is one of those. It's actually a cell phone purse, and we picked it up like on, I don't know, Amazon or Walmart, and it was pretty cheaply made. So it's not something I wanted to use.
Yeah,
But I paid $20 for it.
might as well use it.
But it works perfectly. He just puts it around his neck. He puts his phone in there, so he can hear if the phone rings or it vibrates against his chest, whatever. But yeah, he's not doing the whole shaky thing with it. With
I think I'm going to have to get one for my husband.
Yeah, it was like really cheap. And I'm sure it's cheaper than that. It just presented itself as something better than it was.
Yeah. Well, of all the things, as I'm aging now and looking back on my life, I've been able to say a couple of things. In a few months from now, I'm going to be able to say I'm the author of a book.
Yes, we're very excited about that.
Yeah, the 15 Code Types book, Barclay is going to publish it. And so I'm just working on it, trying to get it finished. And, but I'm also, I think that, if I had to pick one of the many accomplishments, that I've been able to, do impact legislation on gun violence prevention at the state level. I've been a teacher, a high school teacher for 30 years, and I've had students that have gone on and done really great things because they were inspired by my history classes. And, so there's a lot of things that I look back on with great joy and pride. But I think of the one thing that I want on my tombstone, theoretically, I mean, you don't really put it on your tombstone, but the one thing I would really say is the big thing is that I amended the Illinois Constitution, and that's going to last forever. Article 1, Section 8.1 of the Illinois Constitution now reads a list of 13 rights that crime victims have an enforceable constitutional right for that they did not have before.
Right.
And that feels pretty huge.
So if somebody was looking to see if they have victim rights in their own state, that's a constitutional amendment, how would they search for that?
marcyslaw.us, MARSYSLAW. marcyslaw.us has a map of the states. You can actually inquire exactly what the status of rights. Every state has symbolic rights, but the right to enforce the right is what really makes it, a big deal. For example, the Constitution in Illinois used to say victims may have the right to, and it wasn't a shall, it was a may. And if there was, or,
Language.
it could just, yeah, it basically, the language gave all the discretion to the prosecutor, whether or not they would grant the victim this. But understand that in our case, the right to make a victim impact statement, which was in the Constitution already as a voluntary thing. I mean, we waited, 6 months to catch the guy, another 2 years before the trial went, finally got the trial, got him found guilty. Then we have to wait a while longer for the sentencing hearing. And finally, the day comes when we, and nobody told us to, we just started preparing our victim impact statements so we could have our say. Finally, after all these people talking about what happened, and we have to just sit there in the benches and watch it, finally, it's our time to get up and say who Nancy and Richard were, what was taken that night, what was the staggering consequences of this young man's crime. And that is an important part of the sentencing process. It should be, absolutely. But we got a phone call instead saying, the court's really busy today and we're just not going to be bothering. It's a mandatory life without parole sentence anyway because of the multiple murder. So we're just not going to bother with the victim's rights statements. But so you guys just stay home. We're not going to be able to talk to you today. That was in 1993, 94, I think. And so we had been waiting literally years. We had written them and rewritten them, and we were ready, to do this. And to have them just call up and say, we're not even going to let you talk in court that day. We're too busy. And that's what got me interested in this. And I'm like, wait a minute, they can do that? So I started making some inquiries and I found out that they can do it, but they shouldn't be able to, and we should be able to do something about it. And that's when I heard about Marcy's Law, and I just really, really grateful that there was some funding to do the lobbying, the advocacy, the PR work that we had to do. I crisscrossed the state of Illinois. I was on every local radio station, every little TV studio around the state, every, farm newspaper I talked to. I mean, it was an amazing journey, but we were able to really change the constitution of the state in a way that will affect people for years to come. So I feel good about that.
Okay. Well, you know what? I'm really sorry about your sister and her husband.
Thank you.
But what has come out of that? So, how do I phrase that?
You have to try to make what happened to her count for something.
Yeah, to count for something, that it wasn't a wasted life. There's meaning to it.
Yeah. And I've always been willing to talk about her. I've done every interview I've ever been asked to do because I don't want her to be forgotten. And I want everybody to know what she was like. And so, and I think I've done a good job at doing that.
No, you've done a phenomenal job. So, on behalf of victims worldwide, I mean, well, at least in the US anyway, I'm going to say good job. All right. Where do you see yourself continuing with this?
There is hope. And right now we're just going to have to kind of wait and see. The country is very divided right now on other issues, as you well know.
Yeah.
But there is a need to put this in the US Constitution. And President Ronald Reagan, during his presidency, he actually had a commission looking into whether or not, how we could put it into the US Constitution. And they ended up proposing that victims' rights be added to the Sixth Amendment. Like, in other words, rather than a whole new amendment, which is a really hard thing to pass, takes years and every state has to get involved and all that. But instead, there was a process by which Congress could change a sentence in the Sixth Amendment of the Constitution, and it would give victims, it would name victims as also having rights, because, and here's the history teacher here. why is it that in the 10 Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the US Constitution that came after we wrote our Constitution in 1789, then we started, having these amendments, things that needed to be fixed. And the first 10 were all about the rights of the accused. And the first few were, freedom of speech and press and assembly and all that. But then you get into, the right to remain silent, the right to not have to testify against yourself, the right to a speedy trial, the right to no cruel or unusual punishment. Those are all in those first few amendments. Why is it that there was so much focus on the rights of the accused and in those days? And it's because they had just come through a revolution with the British. The King of England was rounding people up and killing them without any trial. The rights of people who were facing trial and facing punishment from the government was very fresh in their minds. And so they made sure that all of those horrible things that had been done to them by the government of England and the King of England during the American Revolutionary era, that they made sure that that was protected in our new society. And so it was really never like victims in those days were always a part of their trials, always heard from, always present, because let's say, Mary, you steal my cow, and we're living in 1789, okay? And you steal my cow. The way that the prosecution works is I'm the prosecutor, I the victim, I'm the prosecutor, because there are no professional prosecutors in 1789. And so I go down to the town square in the saloon where the judge is riding on his horse doing what they called a circuit court, which we now still have, only they're in buildings. They rode a horse circuit, and they would hold trials or hearings or whatever in these town squares going on horseback. And I would come to the town square and I'd say, Mary Quendo stole my horse. And that
I thought it was a cow, Jennifer.
Oh, cow. Okay. Mary Quendo stole my cow. And so the victim, would be the prosecutor. So, and you would, and there was no professional defense attorneys and prosecutors and stuff in those days. There was some in the big cities, but very few. So the point is that we didn't need to write into our Constitution the rights of victims to be present, to be heard from, to be notified in their cases. It just wasn't an issue until well into the 20th century, where we finally have professional prosecutors everywhere and a bureaucracy developing around law enforcement that victims keep getting pushed further and further and further away from. And it really wasn't until World War II and Hitler and the genocide of the Jews and so many other people in Europe that the United Nations wrote the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was the first document that declared that crime victims, half of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is victims' rights, the rights of people to property and to safety and to life, liberty, and so on. So that's been just in my parents' lifetime that it's been an issue.
Okay. All right. So can we ask what the status is on the Nancy and Richard's killer?
Yeah. So he is, because of a Supreme Court decision in 2013 called Miller v. Alabama, because he was under the age of 18 at the time of the crimes, he was 4 weeks shy of his 17th birthday. He was tried as an adult, which is perfectly acceptable in most states to have a finding that they are mature enough to be tried as an adult between the ages of 14 and 17. There's always that sort of, let's look at the individual and see, are they adult worthy or not? And he was definitely found to be that. Tried as an adult, sentenced as an adult. But the Miller v. Alabama Supreme Court ruling in 2013, which was a result of a significant amount of money that was put into advocacy, progressive advocacy for sentencing reform, because let's face it, America is a very heavily incarcerated country compared to the rest of the world. We just like to lock people up longer. And for the most part, I agree that we are over incarcerated. Like, I just don't even think you should put nonviolent people in prison. You do other things, community service, mental health care, whatever. If somebody is nonviolent and it's a crime, I don't know why we have marijuana offenders still sitting in jail in some cases. That's crazy. So, but this was a sentencing reform that was paid for by George Soros. And I hate to say that because, I consider myself politically progressive, but he put a ton of money because he thinks that America is too, incarceration heavy. And he gives $1 billion with a B to these advocates that work on juvenile justice reform. And so they targeted reducing sentencing for juveniles, and it resulted in that Supreme Court decision. And they had a ton of money to do it, and they had PR firms, and they had TV shows, and they had lobbyists and everything. So they got this Supreme Court ruling done, and it gives him a right to be resentenced for these crimes. So here we are now. That Supreme Court decision was in 2013. It is now 2023. 10 years later, he is still trying to appeal what he can do, because he got 3 life sentences, 2 automatic for Nancy and Richard, for which he will be resentenced under Miller v. Alabama. But the killing of the baby, intentional homicide of an unborn child, that sentence was not mandatory by the court. The court did not have to give him life without parole for that baby. They could have given him as little as 20 years or as much as life without parole. The judge gave him a 3rd life without parole sentence. It's what was called a discretionary sentence as opposed to the mandatory sentences he got for Nancy and Richard. So he's trying to get them put together so that he can get resentenced and get out somehow. He is appealing the fact that he's been told that baby's sentence is going to stand. And he's got a case before the appellate court right now that we're just waiting to hear. But here it is. I mean, we've been working for 10 years to try to be done. I am still going to court all the time. I'm still having to write letters, talk to the news media, talk to the prosecutors. My parents have gone. They're dead. Nancy and Richard are dead. My sister is advocating, unfortunately, for my only surviving nuclear family member is advocating for the killer, because she's a defense attorney and she's written a book, and she's got a very twisted view of things because she's got an audience that tells her she's a saintly person. So it's difficult. It's really difficult because it's going to be me versus my only surviving sister advocating for and against his incarceration. But on my father's deathbed, when he was dying of cancer, his last words to me literally was, "Promise me you'll take care of your mother." I said, "I promise, Daddy." And then he said, "Promise me you'll keep Mr. Bureau in prison." I said, "I promise, Daddy." So I'm going to be there. I'm going to represent my parents till the end of my life if I have to. And that just goes to show you it really never ends for victims of violence.
Okay. All right, Jennifer, thank you for taking time out of your day to be here.
Thank you, Mary, for letting me tell this story. Wow. Thank you.
Very eye-opening. And next week, we'll interview someone probably
with a happier story, I hope.
With a way happier story. A little lighter. Yeah. No, I love the friendships I've made in the dog grooming world because they are my happy place. This is a joyous thing. It's very therapeutic, and I'm very grateful for it. Awesome. Again, Jennifer, thank you so much. Thank you, Mary.